I would like to give a talk, which is my form of generosity at this group. And the name of the talk is Mutual Vulnerability. And I came up with that name because I was struck by how vulnerable we are together as human beings, and how clearly that's part of our practice. And it's because it's part of our life, and our life is our practice. They're not separate. The Dharma is not over here and life is over here. It's all right here. And so vulnerable in the dictionary, it's equated with being unprotected or undefended or exposed or unshielded. And also in the dictionary, it was said a very interesting thing, which was kind of paradoxical. It also said vulnerable means wide open. And wide open is something we do when we practice. We open ourselves to reality, to this moment, to experience, and see what happens. And here is the other thing that I found in the dictionary about vulnerable. They said it's rare, but sometimes it's used, the other word that's used is pregnable, that we are pregnable, that we can be, life can be birthed through us when we're vulnerable. And that's part of Dharma practice, that we come alive in a new way. We are reborn actually each moment in the understanding of the Dharma. There's a new Tomas or Leela or Todd or Virgil or John or Elise or Karen or Francisco every moment. And so that's part of what it means to land here as we practice meditation, and really land here not in our thoughts and ideas and beliefs and memories and blah, 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 all the blah, blah, blah of the mind, but land here in the living reality of this precious moment that is really part of our precious human birth as human beings. So the article I read that stimulated my wanting to talk about this, I'm going to read you a little bit. Here's the headline was Arctic Zombie Viruses. Arctic zombie viruses in Siberia could spark new pandemic. Right? Okay. I just want you to get Arctic zombie viruses, and I'm quoting, in Siberia could spark a new pandemic. So I thought, what the hell is that about? And I'm vulnerable to some zombie viruses? What does that even mean? And so what it means is that there's a threat of an outbreak from microbes that are trapped in the permafrost for a millennia, that is now being exposed, that's being caused by increased Siberian shipping activity. I mean, this is like a Marx Brothers movie, really, is what it sounds like to me. But it's true. And it said humanity's facing a new pandemic threat because of ancient viruses that are frozen in Arctic permafrost that could be released by earth warming and this Siberian shipping activity that also helps warm things. And they're calling it the strains of Methuselah microbes. And I mean, I love the name Methuselah microbes. Like we could get shirts that say Methuselah microbes, like we're a gang from the past. And but it's what they're calling, and they're saying these are zombie viruses that have been isolated by researchers who are fear that a medical emergency could be triggered by disease from the distant past. That the scientists isolated live viruses in Siberia and showed they could affect organisms, even though they've been buried in permafrost for thousands of years, right? Thousands of years. But they revealed there's different strains from 7 different sites in Siberia, and they showed they could infect cells. And one virus sample was 48,500 years old. So this is old school dukkha. If you don't know dukkha, it means suffering, but this suffering's been around a long time. And so, and this key thing about it is that the history of epidemic outbreaks, key component is the change in how land is used. And they said that there was a virus spread by fruit bats called the Nipah virus, who were driven from their habitats by humans. And the bats came out, and then, we caught this virus from them. Or monkeypox, which is alive today, and people get monkeypox, is linked to the urbanization of Africa and how the change in land use has what's the word I want? It stimulated these different viruses to then be in the world for us. And so the eco change in the Arctic, the change in land use, could also do this now because permafrost may contain viruses up to 1 million years old, right? And they think the human species is about 300,000 years old, right? So these viruses are older than us, and our immune systems may have never been in contact with some of these microbes. And the scenario really is this: an unknown virus that infected Neanderthals could come back and get us, right? We could be vulnerable to Neanderthalian viruses. And the University of the Arctic is doing its best to establish quarantine facility and medical expertise to pinpoint early cases and treat them to contain the infection. So I read this, and I was like, on one hand, I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? Who cares? Except that shit happens. And it points to our vulnerability, and the vulnerability for us as humans that is ongoing and is part of a lived human experience that you all know. You all are vulnerable, and you all could say many different ways you experience your vulnerability. It's just part of the deal. It's part of being human, body, heart, and mind. And, we all know as a species we're vulnerable to ecological crisis in all kinds of ways, from global warming or, from the lack of availability of water in some parts of the world, right? Or as a species, we're exposed to the endless wars of human ignorance, really, the dukkha of human beings fighting to try to get what they want or they think they need or have to have to protect themselves, whether it's, Russia and the Ukraine or Israel and Hamas, or the internal wars in Myanmar or Burma that are happening among peoples. And this is part of the vulnerability of being human. And these are primitive psychological responses. These are very instinctual. Really, these are part of the animal instincts, the survival instincts that humans have, that awakening means we're not just caught in our primitive instinctual response to reality, but we have enough presence, awareness, and present-centeredness to respond skillfully. And so that, because we're also the primitive psychological responses are the widening of the otherness that happens in this country, of the left or right, or the rich or the poor, the Republicans or the Democrats, and whatever it might be, whatever division, whatever othering there is, right, is a way that people try to protect themselves from feeling their vulnerability. And the misunderstanding is that our vulnerability is actually an option to awaken, an option to discover the goodness of who and what we are, or the beauty of who and what we are, and the wisdom of who and what we are. And I found a quote from M. Scott Peck, who some of you may remember. He was a psychiatrist, I believe, who wrote The Road Less Taken in the 70s, which is in the last century. And he said, there can be no vulnerability without risk. There can be no vulnerability without risk. There can be no community without vulnerability. There can be no peace and ultimately no life without community. When we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer be vulnerable. But to grow up is to accept our vulnerability. And so I've been very interested in the vulnerability question, first from the article, and then from feeling my own vulnerability, which of course you can all keep reflecting on your own vulnerability. So this week I started experiencing vertigo. And if you've never had vertigo, I hope you never have it. It's not pleasant. And vertigo is a dizziness, or it's like spinning, or sometimes you can't even stand up because the vertigo is so bad. And it's caused, they say, by a crystal that comes and goes into one of the ear canals, and so you lose your sense of balance, something like that. But the experience of vertigo is it comes from nowhere. Really, I woke up one morning and I could tell something was a little off, and I went to do some stretching that I do, and I stretch over a big ball, and I laid on the ball. It was like, oh, I just almost fell on the ground, because that's how the whole thing spun. My whole consciousness spun, and it was just spinning, and you just wanted it to stop. And the way to stop it is by stop moving totally and just wait until it calms down a little. And I've had vertigo before, but it hasn't been for years. And every time I've thought I knew how to get rid of it, I didn't. And every time I thought I didn't know how to get rid of it, it went away on its own. And so it's been a little bit of a mystery for me. But because I've had previous experience with vertigo, I could respond with a little bit of intelligence and kindness and objectivity. I got, oh, this is vertigo. And really, it's been years. So I was like, what is this? Oh, fuck, this is vertigo. And then with the vertigo, I realized the first thing is to open to that's what's here. And that's, of course, key to our whole meditation practice, is to open to what's here. And then to accept what's here, not to deny it, and then to see how to relax with it, how to open to it. And so everything got slowed down, everything I had to do, and I could still function, but there were certain things I didn't in my routine that I didn't do, because it didn't make any sense to go to the gym and try to work out with heavy weights if I'm going to start spinning and falling down. And it really didn't make any sense to go swim in the bay, because you don't want to get dizzy when you're swimming in the bay. The bay's intense enough without vertigo. It's not the right thing to do. And so the key was, how do I keep functioning and respond in supplemental ways that allow me to function as best as I could? I started walking with a cane just to make sure I was balanced enough, because the feeling of imbalance starts to stimulate the sense of vertigo. And so I was walking around just to try to get a little bit outside, a little bit of exercise. And then also not taking it personally, even though it's very personal, but recognizing it's just dukkha, right? And dukkha is here in the midst of non-dukkha, is also here. And our vulnerability is here in the midst of some kind of presence or awareness, and that we can then work with whatever's making us feel vulnerable. And also the mutuality of our vulnerability, which is what the talk is named, the mutuality of vulnerability, mutual vulnerability, is shared by all of us. And that helps normalize it. And that's one of the things that helps us, that helps all of us relax, is just seeing how normal dukkha is. And it's not personal in that way, it's universal, even though we have to respond personally to it. And so I'm speaking a little bit about my own personal vulnerability, but also last night I had dinner. My father-in-law turned 87. And that's a good age, 87. I don't know how many people here are 87. I'm just trying to see who's here exactly. Sarah, are you here, Sarah? I'm not seeing you. Oh, there you are, Sarah. I don't know how old you are, Sarah, but you're up there somewhere. I know that. Maybe you could say how old you are, or can Sarah unmute? Can we unmute Sarah for a second? Can you unmute yourself, Sarah? Wait, or here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, how old?
Well, I've had my 95th and I'm halfway to 96.
Yeah, fantastic, Sarah. Thank you. So we do have somebody older than my father. Maybe there's more, but I thought there was one. 95. Blessing to have you here. Keep breathing, and relax, both, all of the above. And but for my father-in-law, who's been a very, very active person his whole life, very capable, functional, he's doing okay. He still drives during the day, not at night, because of the vulnerability of being older. And also, but he talked about not fulfilling his travel plans, and he loves to travel. It's been one of his loves of his life, and he's retired. He's worked a whole life. He was an attorney. He's doing okay, but he was supposed to go, and I didn't even know this. He was scheduled to go to Botswana in Africa, and he realized it was too much for him. That 25 hours of travel to get there would be too much. And it really made him sad, but it was part of acknowledging his vulnerability. That was not the right thing to do. And it was very poignant to hear it, because he's somebody who likes to be able to do what he wants to do, like all of us do. But things change, and there's a poignancy to our vulnerability. There's a famous haiku from Isa that I love that expresses the vulnerability. He talks about the world of dew, and there's a kind of beauty in Japanese poetry about the world of dew. He says, the world of dew is a world of dew, and yet. And the and yet is because he wrote this haiku a month after his daughter had died. And he was talking about the beauty of life, and yet the vulnerability of being alive and what can happen to any of us or all of us. And so the vulnerability of being human and dealing with human life, difficulty, danger, dukkha, and how to keep the heart and mind open, to keep awakening and staying true to what we care about, what we love, and remain open and be vulnerable. Because to not be vulnerable means we're going to close our heart, or it'll leave us rigid or frightened or unhappy or dissatisfied. And that's part of what keeps the world increasingly territorial and defensive, because people aren't willing to open to their vulnerability. And so how do we, as a community, as a practitioner, as someone who loves the Dharma, the truth, how do we allow our heart to be open without losing our values and our sense of goodness or a sense of justice? What is it that allows our heart to be vibrant in this world? Given we're vulnerable, excuse me. We're vulnerable to the inevitable pain or conflicts or difficulties or betrayals that comes with being human. How can we embrace the power of our heart and our heartfulness of practice? The writer Rilke, he said, ultimately it is on our vulnerability that we depend. Ultimately it is on our vulnerability that we depend. And so learning how to, with difficulty, with coming into contact with being vulnerable, we can stop and return to the Dharma, to the truth of what we care about, and the heart's goodness and kindness and compassion and strength that comes with opening to vulnerability. And it's not just a poetic ideal, but it's a lived reality that's displayed by many of our beloved mentors or guides or teachers, like people like Thich Nhat Hanh, who just, is a Buddha who lived through the Vietnam War and never quit fighting for freedom for people, all peoples, and not staying stuck about that, but really, or not being done with it. Or Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who lived through 25 years in prison and came out and changed the world. Or Mahatma Gandhi, who had the courage to be beaten or jailed or and then persevered through difficulties, who never surrendered his values, right? His vulnerability was actually his strength. And now Alexei Navalny, who the Russian man who won 30% of the Russian vote and then had to flee Russia and then was poisoned and survived being poisoned when he was living in Europe and went back to Russia because of his values and what he cared about, and now just died a few days ago in Russia. And, they think they just killed him in the prison he was in Siberia. And the strength of heart that knows what it loves, even in a world of pain or uncertainty or injustice. And so learning to let the heart-mind be open so that our intelligence and our kindness and our care can respond to the vulnerability of ourselves and to others, to the world. That we can keep resting in the wisdom of the Dharma, the wisdom of awareness, with the capacity to discover, as we bear witness to the suffering, that our vulnerable heart is open to the sorrows of the world, but also to the beauty. And that opening is really a precursor to accepting what's here and learning how to live with it skillfully and kindly. And you all know about opening, because opening is we open in meditation, where we open to, first of all, learning how about mindfulness, awareness, compassion, freedom. And openness and spaciousness that's what we're doing when we sit down. Okay, we're being open to the body. We're being open to the breath. Then we're being open to being aware of all the phenomena happening on its own. And so there's a spacious awareness or an open awareness. It's the first quality really of practice, or if we go on a retreat, that we just open to the truth of what's here, or as it's put in Buddhism so poetically, things as they are, things as they are. Because it's not just an intellectual openness, it's an experiential openness or investigation into what's here. And even now, you're being open to the talk, to me, but also to your thoughts, to your feelings, to your body, to your reactions. It's an interesting word in the dictionary. Open, it means to unclose or to make passage possible, right? Or to unlock or remove the coverings. And it's something we all seek because we all go back and forth from being open and closed. And we all know that the closedness may be needed at some point or some time, but that's not how we want to live. That habitual life often leads to a persistent closing down and living in a defensive way towards life or reality. And really the heart's bodies get locked up. And the paradox of opening means even opening to that in order to begin to relax around it or let it go. Because opening also has to do with releasing obstacles or making things accessible. In the dictionary, they say to open means to make known, which is what we do in meditation practice. And then there's a healing component, a paradox that opening also means to burst and discharge, like an old wound. And so it's a beautiful understanding as we practice to keep opening to the truth, to the Dharma, to ourselves, moment by moment by moment, whether we're formally practicing meditation or moment to moment, 24/7 mindfulness. So the beauty of opening ultimately is to open and accept everything, even our unopenness at times. We can open to being closed. Thomas Merton said it this way. He said, "True love and prayer are learned in the hour when love becomes impossible and the heart has turned to stone." True love and prayer are learned in the hour when love becomes impossible and the heart has turned to stone. It's really about opening to our vulnerability that allows the heart to open. And I'll say it a couple more ways from one of my teachers, Hamid Ali. He said, difficulty for most human beings is feeling or being vulnerable. He said, difficulty for most human beings is feeling or being vulnerable, but without it, we are not human and cannot open to the magic of reality. We can't know what we feel, cannot feel close to ourselves, or enjoy the refinement of human consciousness, which I would say the opening of human consciousness. He says, we need to learn how to be comfortable with vulnerability, this inevitable fact of life for all humans. And it starts out often scary or uncomfortable, but if we stay with it, vulnerability opens to a new quality of consciousness, which makes us feel gentle, soft, cool, a coolness that refreshes, and can have tears that become fluidity of our consciousness, like a gentle, transparent running brook. And he ends, he says, when present, we can settle into an exquisite simplicity, ordinariness, we can settle into exquisite simplicity and the ordinariness of being human with our vulnerability. And he's pointing at a kind of vulnerability that's both social and personal, right? That we can have the courage to be with ourselves where we are, and we can have the courage and kindness to be with our world where it is. And I'm going to end with the poet David White, who I actually saw him not too long ago in San Francisco. I'd never seen him before. And he definitely, he's a real poet, and seems like he thinks of himself as a Dharma teacher. I don't know if he does, but he likes to act that way. And he said, vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is underlying, ever-present, and abiding in undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. It's a beautiful line here, what he says. Vulnerability, it's not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. It's not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever-present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. And he goes on. I'm not going to continue. He does say this. He says the only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ring the bell and I'll say a little sharing of merit. Let's see. Here, wait. Offering our good wishes. Wait, I got to go back to gallery view. Really just want to offer our good wishes and our appreciating the blessing of being able to practice together tonight. May the goodness of our practice go out in every direction, touch vulnerable beings in every realm, in this realm and all realms. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May all beings be free from judgment, free from criticism, free from misunderstanding their true nature, their Buddha nature. May all beings be free. May we all awaken and awaken together, and moment by moment by moment. May all beings be free.